Elena's hands trembled as she carefully balanced the tray of champagne flutes, the cool glass pressing into her damp palms. The grand ballroom of the Harrington estate shimmered under golden chandeliers, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the evening's festivities. Laughter rippled through the crowd, refined and effortless, as if each guest had been born knowing the art of being important. She could feel their eyes on her, watching, scrutinizing, whispering behind the delicate rims of their crystal glasses. She was a barista, you know. No class at all. What was Victor thinking? Elena had expected it, but that didn't make it sting any less. She kept her posture straight, her expression unreadable. A practiced smile sat on her lips, the kind that suggested she was listening but not entirely present. She let the gossip swirl around her like an invisible storm, refusing to let it shake her. Tonight was her wedding night, the beginning of something new. Or so it should have been. Across the room, Victor Harrington, her husband, stood at the center of an admiring crowd. He was dressed in an expensive black suit that had probably cost more than her childhood home. He was effortlessly charismatic, flashing an easy smile as he entertained a group of business moguls and politicians. Elena watched as he placed a firm hand on a man's shoulder, laughing at something she hadn't heard. He hadn't looked at her in hours. The ceremony had been grand, elegant, and suffocating. Every detail had been perfect, down to the imported lilies that decorated the tables. It was a Harrington wedding, meant to impress, not to celebrate love. Elena took a slow breath, adjusting the lace sleeve of her pristine white gown. The dress, chosen by Victor's mother, was stunning, but it didn't feel like her. She felt like a guest at her own wedding, an accessory to be displayed, not a bride to be cherished. Victor finally turned toward her, his smile still in place as he excused himself from his entourage. He walked toward her with the confidence of a man who had never known failure, his sharp blue eyes scanning her face like a prized possession. "Elena," he murmured, placing a firm hand on her waist. The touch was for show, meant to appear intimate in the eyes of the guests watching them. "Why do you look like you're about to cry?" She blinked rapidly, forcing a soft laugh. "I'm not." "Good." He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Because you have everything a woman could possibly want now. Try to look like you belong." And just like that, the moment shattered whatever lingering illusion she had tried to hold on to. Elena turned away, her throat tight. Victor straightened, plastering his charming expression back on as he turned toward the arriving guests. "Ah, Senator Whitmore. So glad you could make it." Elena was already forgotten. By the time the last guest had left, her smile felt permanently etched into her cheeks, her face sore from pretending. The Harrington estate, so lively just hours before, was now eerily quiet. Only the soft clinking of the catering staff cleaning up the extravagant mess remained. Victor led her through the grand entrance of their penthouse, a stunning structure perched high above Blackwood City, offering an unobstructed view of the shimmering skyline. The marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier, the scent of fresh roses still lingering in the air. Elena stepped inside, feeling the cold space swallow her whole. Victor loosened his tie with one hand, shrugging off his suit jacket before tossing it carelessly onto a nearby chair. He exhaled, stretching his neck from side to side. Finally, she hesitated at the door, fingers curling around the silk fabric of her gown. It was a beautiful ceremony. Victor chuckled, shaking his head. It was exhausting, but necessary. He turned to face her, his sharp gaze sweeping over her as if truly seeing her for the first time that night. "You clean up well. I'll give you that." A strange mix of emotions settled in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an observation. Victor walked past her, undoing the first few buttons of his shirt, heading straight for the bar nestled in the corner of the spacious living room. He poured himself a drink, swirling the amber liquid in the glass before taking a slow sip. Elena remained by the door, watching him. The reality of the night settled on her shoulders like a weight she hadn't quite prepared for. This was her life now. Victor leaned against the bar, watching her over the rim of his glass. "You can relax, you know. No one's watching anymore." She forced a small smile. I know. He exhaled, setting his drink down. I did you a favor. You realize that, don't you? Elena frowned, shifting her weight slightly. What do you mean? Victor smirked, crossing the room toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Let's be honest, Elena. Before me, what did you have? A rundown apartment? A dead-end job making coffee for people like me? Her stomach twisted. He tilted his head, watching her expression carefully. I took you out of that. Gave you a life women dream about. Her throat tightened, but she held his gaze. I didn't marry you for your money. Victor let out a low chuckle. Of course you did, and that's okay. But let's not pretend this was some fairy tale romance. You married up, Elena. And for that, you should be grateful. Grateful. The word echoed in her mind, sharp and unforgiving. Victor leaned in, his fingers brushing a loose curl from her face. You'll get used to this life. I'm not an easy man, but I'll take care of you. Just don't embarrass me. She swallowed, willing the lump in her throat to disappear. I see. He smiled, seemingly satisfied with her response. Without another word, he turned, finishing off his drink before heading toward the bedroom. Elena stood frozen in place, her hands slowly curling into fists at her sides. Grateful. That was what he expected of her. To be thankful that he had chosen her, plucked her from her so-called miserable life, and dressed her up like a doll to fit into his world. Her nails dug into her palms. He didn't know. He had no idea who she truly was, what she was capable of. Elena lifted her chin, inhaling sharply. The night sky stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blinking like tiny promises. Victor had saved no one. He just didn't know it yet. Wait, before we go any further, let's make a deal. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, show some love. Tap that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And don't keep this to yourself. Share it with someone who loves a good story. All right, ready? Let's get back to it. Elena sat by the grand window of their penthouse, watching the city lights flicker below. The skyline of Blackwood City stretched infinitely, a maze of bright neon and shadowed alleys. It was beautiful, yet it felt like a cage. Victor had come home late again. The scent of expensive cologne and whiskey clung to him, along with something else, an unfamiliar floral perfume. She recognized it immediately. It wasn't hers. He barely acknowledged her presence, tossing his coat onto a chair before walking past her like she was nothing more than the furniture. The same man who had once vowed to love and cherish her now treated her as an afterthought. Did you eat? She asked softly, knowing the answer didn't matter. Victor loosened his tie, not bothering to look at her. Had dinner with clients. Clients. She knew what that meant. He collapsed onto the couch, scrolling through his phone with a smirk playing at his lips, probably reading some flirtatious text from another woman. Elena turned away, swallowing the bitterness that rose in her throat. The pain was unbearable, but she endured. She had always endured. The next morning, Elena woke to find their walk-in closet filled with bags from designer stores. Dresses, shoes, handbags, items she had never asked for. Victor's version of love was transactional. When he bothered to acknowledge her at all, it was through material things, as if throwing money at her would make up for his absence. Elena ran her fingers over the silk fabric of an expensive gown, the price tag dangling mockingly. She had once dreamed of a life where she felt adored, where love meant something more than just being adorned like a lifeless doll. But Victor never truly saw her. Later that day, they attended a high-profile gala. Victor's arm was around her waist, not out of affection, but possession. Elena, smile, he muttered through clenched teeth as photographers clicked away. She obeyed. She always did. Inside, the ballroom was filled with Blackwood's elite. Beautiful, polished women circled Victor like moths to a flame. They laughed at his jokes, touched his arm unnecessarily, and made it clear they saw Elena as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. Victor didn't discourage them. If anything, he enjoyed the attention. At one point, a stunning blonde in a red dress leaned in too close, her laughter laced with flirtation. Victor, I don't know how you keep yourself from spoiling all of us the way you spoil your wife. Victor chuckled, swirling his drink lazily. Maybe she should take some fashion tips from you. The words cut deeper than she expected. Elena stiffened, gripping her champagne flute. He didn't even glance at her, too engrossed in the adoring crowd around him. He was comparing her, mocking her. She excused herself, slipping away into the quiet of the restroom, her heart pounding. Staring at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The expensive gown, the styled hair, the flawless makeup, none of it could hide the emptiness in her eyes. She had married a man who made her feel invisible. Days passed in a blur of loneliness. Victor was either gone or too busy pretending she didn't exist. One evening, she found him in his study, speaking on the phone. His tone was warm, charming, the kind of voice she hadn't heard directed at her in months. "Yes, I'll see you at the club tomorrow," he murmured, laughing softly. Elena stood frozen at the doorway. She wasn't foolish. She knew what was happening. Victor looked up, finally noticing her. His expression turned unreadable. Ending the call, he sighed. "What?" She hesitated. "Are you seeing someone else?" His lips curved into a slow, amused smirk. "Don't be ridiculous." She wanted to believe him, but the nagging ache in her chest told her the truth. The breaking point came one night after yet another cold dinner. Victor arrived home late, his tie undone, the top buttons of his shirt carelessly open. Elena had waited for him, hoping, for once, he would notice her, that he would see how much this marriage was crushing her. Instead, he walked past her, heading straight for the bar. He poured himself a drink, ignoring the plate of untouched food on the table. "You're home late," she said, keeping her voice steady. Victor exhaled, sipping his whiskey. "Had a business meeting." Another lie. Elena pressed on. "You don't even look at me anymore." Victor scoffed, setting his glass down. "What do you want me to do, Elena? Stare at you all day?" She swallowed. "I just want to know when we stop being a real couple." Victor ran a hand through his hair, clearly irritated. "Don't start this." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Do you even love me?" He looked at her then, truly looked at her for the first time in weeks. His expression was unreadable, his gaze piercing. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a sleek black card. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the table. "Here." His voice was indifferent. "Buy yourself something decent for once." The room fell silent. Elena stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. Her hands clenched at her sides. This was what she had become to him. Someone to be bought, dismissed, cast aside. She finally lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes. The cracks in her heart widened. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Something dangerous. Victor had no idea. She was done waiting to be seen. The grand ballroom of the Harrington estate gleamed under the golden chandeliers, the air thick with expensive perfume and the sound of clinking glasses. It was another gala, another night where Victor played the charming host and Elena played the perfect wife. The dress he had chosen for her was stunning, an emerald green gown that hugged her figure perfectly. Yet, despite the beauty of the night, she felt like an outsider in her own life. Victor's hand was firm on her waist as he guided her through the sea of Blackwood City's elite. Business tycoons, politicians, and celebrities gathered in small clusters, exchanging empty laughter and well-rehearsed pleasantries. "She's breathtaking, Victor." A woman with diamond-studded earrings cooed, her eyes raking over Elena as if she were inspecting a painting. Victor smirked, swirling the drink in his hand. "Yes, well, she cleans up nicely." Elena stiffened, but she said nothing. She was used to these backhanded compliments, the subtle ways Victor diminished her. A group of men approached, all wealthy and powerful, their laughter carrying through the room. Victor welcomed them with open arms, slipping seamlessly into their conversation. Elena stood quietly beside him, knowing her role to smile, nod, and never interrupt. Then it happened. "So, Victor," one of the men said, raising an amused brow, "I heard your wife used to be a waitress." "That true?" Elena's breath caught. The conversation around them stilled slightly, subtle smirks forming on the faces of the guests. Victor chuckled, the sound sharp. "Oh, you have no idea," he said, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "She used to serve coffee in a dingy little shop. Can you believe it?" Laughter erupted. Elena felt the heat rush to her face. Her hands trembled, hidden beneath the folds of her gown. She wanted to look at him, to plead silently for him to stop, but she knew better. He was enjoying this. She must have been adorable in that little apron. Another voice chimed in. Victor smirked, setting his glass down. "Might as well go back to your cafe days. You always did look better serving me than standing beside me." The room spun. Elena's nails dug into her palm as humiliation crept up her spine. The whispers, the amused glances, the way people looked at her as if she were nothing more than a joke. Everything crashed down on her at once. Then, as if fate decided to twist the knife, a waiter carrying a tray of red wine stumbled nearby. Time seemed to slow. The glass tipped. The deep crimson liquid splashed onto Elena's pristine gown. Gasps echoed around the room. The fabric clung to her skin, stained and ruined. The cold seeped through, but nothing compared to the icy sting of Victor's expression. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Perfect," he muttered. "Absolutely perfect." The waiter stammered an apology, his hands shaking. Elena didn't blame him. She didn't even care. Victor leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough for her to hear. Pathetic. Something inside her snapped. She had spent months swallowing her pain, enduring the humiliation, convincing herself that the storm would pass. But tonight, in front of a room full of people who saw her as nothing more than an amusing mistake, she knew she couldn't do it anymore. She turned sharply on her heel, the wet fabric of her dress clinging to her legs as she strode toward the exit. "Elena." Victor's voice was sharp, demanding, but she didn't stop. She didn't owe him obedience. Not anymore. The cold night air hit her like a slap, but she welcomed it. She descended the grand staircase of the estate, stepping onto the rain-soaked pavement. The sky had opened up, heavy droplets cascading down, washing away the remnants of the night's humiliation. She walked blindly, her heels clicking against the wet ground, her arms wrapping around herself for warmth. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had shed enough for Victor Harrington. The city lights blurred through the rain, neon reflections shimmering on the slick pavement. The sounds of distant car horns and chatter surrounded her, but she felt utterly alone. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. There was no love in her marriage, no kindness, no warmth, just a game of power that she had never agreed to play. Her body ached from exhaustion, her heart heavy with a pain she couldn't put into words. But as she stood there, drenched in rain and stained in humiliation, a strange feeling settled in her chest. Freedom. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The cafe door swung open with a desperate push, the small bell overhead chiming weakly as Elena stumbled inside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, so different from the cold rain soaking through her ruined dress. Her breath came in short gasps, her body trembling, but whether from the chill or the emotions clawing at her chest, she wasn't sure. The place was nearly empty at this late hour, just a few scattered customers nursing warm drinks, lost in their own thoughts. No one paid her any attention, except for him. Daniel Laurent sat in his usual corner, a book open in front of him, though his eyes had long left the page. He had seen her the moment she walked in, dripping wet, her makeup smudged, her shoulders weighed down by something heavier than just the rain. Elena didn't even notice him at first. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter as she ordered a cup of tea, her voice hoarse. The barista, a young girl with tired eyes, gave her a sympathetic look before hurrying to prepare her drink. Daniel closed his book, watching her. He had known Elena for years, long before she had become Mrs. Harrington. He had seen her smile with genuine joy, seen her laugh without restraint. But the woman in front of him now, she was a ghost of the person he used to know. Elena took her tea with shaking hands, finding a seat near the window. The city outside was a blur of neon and rain, a perfect reflection of the turmoil inside her. She stared at the steam rising from her cup, lost in thought, until a familiar voice pulled her back. "You look like hell." She glanced up. Daniel stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, his sharp eyes studying her face. A weak chuckle escaped her lips. "Nice to see you too." Without asking, he slid into the seat across from her. "Elena." His tone was softer now, concerned. "What happened?" She hesitated. There were 1,000 things she could say, but none of them would matter. So she took a sip of her tea instead, letting the warmth soothe her throat. Daniel didn't push. He never did. He simply waited, his presence steady, like an anchor in the storm she was barely holding back. Minutes passed in silence before she finally spoke. It was a gala tonight. His jaw tensed. He didn't need to ask. He already knew what that meant. "Elena," he said carefully, "why do you let him do this to you?" She let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the cup. There it was, the question she had been avoiding, the one that had been whispered behind her back by those who still cared. The one she sometimes asked herself in the dead of night. She met his gaze and smiled bitterly. "Not yet." Daniel frowned. "What does that even mean?" Elena didn't answer. How could she? He wouldn't understand. No one would. But she wasn't just a victim of this marriage. She wasn't waiting for a miracle. She was waiting for the right moment. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. He saw it, the storm brewing behind her eyes. He had always been good at reading people, and Elena was no exception. She wasn't broken, not entirely. There was something else underneath the pain. Something Victor Harrington should be very, very afraid of. The marble floors of the penthouse gleamed under the dim glow of the chandelier. The dinner Victor had demanded sat untouched on the grand dining table. The air between them was thick, electric with the tension of another inevitable fight. Victor swirled the whiskey in his glass, his expression set in irritation. "You're unbelievable, Elena," he scoffed. "You act like you have the right to be upset." Elena stood across from him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had stopped arguing back weeks ago, but tonight, something was different. She wasn't just standing there, enduring. She was watching, calculating. Victor hated that look. "You think being silent makes you stronger?" He sneered, setting his drink down with a sharp clink. "It makes you pathetic." Elena inhaled deeply, steadying herself. The weight of years of belittlement pressed against her chest, but this time, she didn't shrink. She met his gaze, unwavering. "I made your dinner," she said coolly. "You didn't touch it." Victor scoffed. "Do you think that's enough? That cooking a meal makes you a wife worth keeping." She didn't flinch. "Do you?" His grip tightened around the crystal tumbler. The anger in his eyes flickered, momentarily caught off guard by her response. He was used to her silence, her compliance. But now, there was something else in her voice. Something that made him uneasy. He leaned forward, his tone dropping into something darker. "Don't test me, Elena." The words were meant to intimidate, but Elena only tilted her head slightly. "Or what, Victor?" A muscle in his jaw twitched. The silence between them stretched, a dangerous string pulled too tight. Then, without warning, he lifted the glass and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering shards, a violent explosion of sound that echoed through the room. The whiskey dripped down the pristine white walls. The remnants of the glass scattered across the floor, catching the light like broken stars. Elena didn't move. She didn't gasp, didn't cower. She simply stared at him, unmoved. Victor's chest rose and fell heavily. His hands clenched at his sides. "You should thank me," he hissed through gritted teeth. "For tolerating you. For keeping you here." Elena let the words settle between them. She let him believe, just for a second longer, that he had one. Then, she took a step forward, slowly, deliberately, until there was barely any space between them. She looked up at him, eyes calm, voice steady. "You're right, Victor." He smirked, triumphant. Elena's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. It was something colder, sharper. "Thank you for showing me exactly who you are." For the first time, Victor Harrington faltered. The morning sunlight slanted through the penthouse windows, casting sharp angles of light against the pristine walls. Victor sat at the head of the dining table, a deep scowl etched into his face as he scrolled through his phone. The usual arrogance in his posture was gone, replaced by something rare, unease. Elena sat across from him, wrapped in her silk robe, cradling a warm cup of tea. She took slow sips, watching, waiting. Victor slammed his phone onto the table, the sharp sound making the silverware rattle. Unbelievable. She lifted an eyebrow. Something wrong? Victor ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. Harrington Enterprises is in chaos. The stock has been fluctuating wildly for weeks, and now someone's been buying up shares, someone powerful enough to start influencing the board. Elena hummed thoughtfully, setting her cup down with a soft clink. That sounds inconvenient. Victor shot her a glare. Inconvenient? It's a disaster. He stood, pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city skyline stretched behind him, vast and indifferent to his turmoil. No one knows who it is. No leaks. No trace. Just a ghost pulling strings. Elena leaned back in her chair, letting the steam from her tea swirl between them. Maybe they're just good at playing the game. Victor exhaled sharply, his fists clenching. Whoever it is, they're making bold moves, too bold. Buying out key shares, influencing board members, even overriding decisions I personally approved. His voice darkened. I swear, whoever is doing this, I'll ruin them. Elena lifted her cup once more, letting the warmth spread through her fingers. The corners of her lips curled ever so slightly. A knowing smile. A silent victory. Victor didn't notice. It had started as a whisper among his board members, hesitation, doubt. At first, Victor brushed it off as minor concerns, the kind that came and went in corporate dealings. But as days turned to weeks, the whispers grew louder. Decisions he made were questioned. Votes that had once been unanimous in his favor were now uncertain. There was hesitation where there had once been blind loyalty. Victor stormed into his office that afternoon, his assistant barely managing to keep up with his long strides. Give me a full report on all major stock acquisitions over the last 2 months, he barked, yanking off his suit jacket and tossing it over the leather chair. Yes, sir, she said quickly, retreating without another word. Victor ran a hand down his face, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had built this empire from the ground up. No one challenged him. Not without consequences. The phone on his desk rang, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. He hesitated before answering. Who the hell is this? He demanded. A pause. Then a smooth, measured voice spoke. Mr. Harrington, I assume you've noticed the shifts within your company. Victor's grip tightened around the phone. Who are you? Another pause. Then, someone who believes it's time for change. A slow rage simmered in Victor's chest. If you think you can take my company from me, you're sorely mistaken. A soft chuckle. Mistaken? No, Mr. Harrington. I'm simply correcting an imbalance. The line went dead. Victor's pulse pounded as he slammed the phone onto the desk. Whoever they were playing a dangerous game, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, Victor arrived home later than usual, his mood fouler than ever. The penthouse was dimly lit, the scent of lavender and vanilla lingering in the air. Elena sat curled up on the sofa, a book resting on her lap, a serene expression on her face. She looked up as he entered, her eyes flicking to the tension in his jaw, the barely concealed fury in his movements. Rough day? She asked, her voice light, almost teasing. Victor scowled. Don't start. She watched as he loosened his tie, pouring himself a generous glass of bourbon before sinking into the chair across from her. He took a long sip, then exhaled sharply. Elena tilted her head slightly. Business troubles? Victor shot her a glare. I don't need your commentary, Elena. She simply smiled, slow and deliberate. Of course not. Silence stretched between them, the only sound the distant hum of the city below. Victor downed the rest of his drink in one go, then ran a hand through his hair. This company is mine, he muttered, more to himself than to her. I built it. I control it. No one takes that from me. Elena lifted her cup to her lips, her expression unreadable. Of course, dear. Victor didn't notice the flicker of amusement in her gaze as she took another sip of her tea. The restaurant was bathed in golden light, the scent of grilled steak and aged wine weaving through the air. Elena sat at the reserved table, her posture graceful, her expression unreadable. Tonight was their anniversary. Or at least, it was supposed to be. Victor arrived late, as expected, but he wasn't alone. The woman at his side was breathtaking, tall, blonde, draped in a red satin dress that clung to her like a second skin. She laughed at something Victor whispered in her ear, her manicured hand resting lightly on his arm. Elena's fingers tightened around her fork, but only for a second. Then, she released it, smoothing the fabric of her dress as she lifted her glass to her lips. Victor smirked as he pulled out a chair for the woman, seating her beside him. He didn't even acknowledge Elena as he signaled for the waiter. "A bottle of your best champagne," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We're celebrating tonight." The woman giggled, running a finger down the stem of her glass. "Oh, what's the occasion?" Victor glanced at Elena, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "My anniversary." A stunned silence hung in the air for half a second before the woman let out a soft, surprised laugh. "Oh, how interesting." Elena set her silverware down with deliberate precision. She folded her hands at her lap and tilted her head slightly, meeting Victor's gaze head-on. "Not at all." Victor's smirk widened. He was expecting outrage, tears, maybe even a dramatic exit. But Elena merely reached for the menu, scanning it as if nothing unusual had happened. He cleared his throat, almost disappointed. "Good, then let's enjoy dinner." The rest of the meal was a display, Victor leaning closer to the woman, whispering things meant to make Elena squirm. He let their hands brush, let their laughter linger just a little too long. He wanted a reaction. He didn't get one. Elena ate slowly, her movements unhurried. She nodded along to the conversation when appropriate, sipped her wine, and never once looked rattled. By the time dessert arrived, Victor was scowling. The woman, oblivious to the battle playing out beneath the surface, excused herself to the restroom. Victor leaned back in his chair, swirling the last of his wine. "You're being unusually quiet," he remarked. Elena dabbed her lips with her napkin. "I don't have much to say." He studied her, expecting some flicker of hurt, some crack in her composure. But there was nothing, just eerie calm. When the woman returned, Victor paid the bill with a flourish, escorting her out with a hand at the small of her back. Elena followed at a leisurely pace, watching them disappear into the night. Victor arrived home well past midnight, the scent of alcohol clinging to his clothes. He fumbled with his tie, kicking off his shoes as he stumbled into the bedroom. "Elena," he called, voice slurred. "Are you awake?" Silence. He frowned, rubbing his temples. His gaze swept across the room. Everything looked the same, yet something felt off. Then he noticed it. The closet door stood slightly ajar. His stomach tightened as he moved toward it, pushing it open fully. Elena's side was empty. The shelves, once lined with her neatly folded clothes, were bare. The hangers swung slightly, as if disturbed only moments ago. The soft scent of her perfume lingered faintly in the air, the last trace of her presence. Victor's grip tightened around the doorframe. His pulse pounded in his ears. She was gone. Victor woke up to the sharp blare of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. His head throbbed from the excess alcohol, and his mouth felt dry, as if he had swallowed sandpaper. Groaning, he reached for the device, squinting against the harsh blue light of the screen. 30 missed calls. His heart lurched. Calls from his board members, his assistant, even reporters. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Something was very, very wrong. He sat up, rubbing his temples, and turned on the television mounted on the opposite wall. The news played on nearly every channel. Harrington Enterprises faces a shocking takeover as the mysterious buyer has been revealed. Victor's breath caught in his throat as the screen changed, showing a press conference. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the image before him remained unchanged. Elena, poised, radiant. unshaken. She stood behind a podium, cameras flashing wildly. Dressed in a sleek ivory suit, she looked nothing like the woman he had mocked, belittled, and ignored. She looked powerful. The reporter's voice continued. Elena Carter Harrington, formerly known only as the wife of Victor Harrington, has stepped forward as the true mastermind behind the recent stock acquisitions. Effective immediately, she holds controlling shares of Harrington Enterprises. Victor's breath came in short, disbelieving gasps. No, this couldn't be happening. Elena adjusted the microphone, her gaze sweeping over the room. Then, in a voice that was calm, yet commanding, she spoke. For years, I let a man belittle me, believing I was nothing. But the truth is, she took a step forward. I own everything he ever had. The words sent a ripple through the room, and then, chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Camera flashes went off like lightning. The murmurs in the audience swelled to a deafening roar. Victor could only watch in horrified realization as the screen zoomed in on her composed expression. The woman he had dismissed as weak, as unimportant, was now standing before the world, unveiling a truth he never saw coming. He bolted upright, nearly tripping over himself as he reached for his phone. His hands shook as he dialed his lawyer, his mind spinning. She can't do this, he barked the moment the line connected. Tell me she can't do this. There was a pause. Then a hesitant voice responded. Victor, legally, she can. The floor seemed to vanish beneath him. Victor stumbled into his office, his assistant nearly dropping her files when she saw the state he was in. Cancel all my meetings, he growled, marching past her. And give me the full details on this mess. He slammed the door shut behind him and threw himself into his chair, turning on his laptop. His inbox was flooded. Emails from shareholders, demands for explanations, notifications of emergency board meetings. All of it spiraling out of his control. His hands hovered over the keyboard, his mind racing. How had he been so blind? How had he never noticed? He clicked on one of the reports. The timeline was damning. Elena had been acquiring shares quietly over the last 2 years, using a network of private investors, moving through shell companies. Each acquisition had been meticulous, careful, designed so that no alarm bells would ring until it was too late. And now it was too late. His office phone rang. He snatched it up. What? A cold, unfamiliar voice greeted him. Mr. Harrington, the board has called an emergency meeting. Attendance is not optional. The line went dead. Victor slammed the phone down, his pulse hammering in his ears. He arrived at headquarters to find his company in an uproar. Employees whispered as he passed, their eyes filled with something he never thought he'd see: pity. His stomach turned as he stepped into the conference room. The board members were already seated, their expressions unreadable. And then she walked in. Elena. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her confidence unshaken. Victor stood frozen as she took her seat at the head of the table. His seat. The realization hit like a freight train. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was his replacement. Victor's world unraveled like a thread pulled from a finely tailored suit, slow at first, then all at once. The empire he had built, the wealth he had flaunted, the power he had wielded, it was all slipping through his fingers. His phone was useless now. Calls went unanswered. Texts remained unseen. His closest allies, the very people who once groveled at his feet, had abandoned him overnight. Victor, it's out of our hands, his most trusted financial advisor had muttered hours earlier, avoiding eye contact. The board voted unanimously. Your accounts have been frozen pending investigation. No one wants to be associated with this disaster. A disaster. That's what they were calling it. Victor had stormed out of the office, past the hushed voices and the sidelong glances of his employees. He needed to go home, needed to breathe, needed to think. When he arrived at the penthouse, something felt off. The air was too still, too empty. Elena, he called out, stepping inside. A stupid habit. Silence greeted him. His footsteps echoed against the cold marble floors. He moved through the space quickly, yanking open closet doors, checking the bedroom, the bathroom. Everything was gone. No designer dresses. No delicate perfumes lining the vanity. No traces of her anywhere. The penthouse looked like a model home, staged for someone else's life. His breath came faster. He stumbled into the living room, scanning the space. And then, his gaze landed on the dining table. A single sheet of paper lay there, neatly folded. His name scrawled on the front in elegant handwriting. He reached for it with trembling fingers, unfolding it carefully, as if the very act might shatter whatever remained of his sanity. Victor, you never married a poor woman. You just never bothered to ask who I really was. His vision blurred. His grip on the letter tightened until the paper crinkled beneath his fingers. A hollow, sickening feeling settled in his chest. For the first time in his life, Victor Harrington felt fear. He sank into the nearest chair, his legs too weak to hold him. The silence of the penthouse pressed in, amplifying the pounding of his heart. The weight of everything he had lost, everything he had ignored, settled heavily on his chest. His mind raced, grasping for explanations. How had he not seen this coming? How had he dismissed Elena so easily, so carelessly, without ever truly knowing her? He had spent years convinced of his own superiority, believing she was beneath him. And now, she had turned the entire city against him with a single revelation. He reread the note, the words burning into his mind. You never married a poor woman. How had she hidden it? How had she planned this? Victor's hands curled into fists. He thought back to all the moments he had ignored her, the times he had laughed at her quiet strength, her patience, her silence. He had mistaken it for weakness. But Elena had never been weak. She had been waiting. A sudden burst of rage coursed through him, momentarily overshadowing the fear. He shot up from the chair, knocking it over in the process. His breathing was ragged, his head pounding. He stormed through the penthouse, tearing through drawers, cabinets, anything that might hold a clue. He refused to believe she had simply vanished. There had to be something, some thread he could pull. Nothing. She had erased herself from his world as effortlessly as one wipes dust from a table. The realization left him breathless. His phone vibrated on the table, the sound like a gunshot in the suffocating quiet. He lunged for it, desperate for an anchor. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Who is this? Hello? Calm voice responded. Mr. Harrington, I believe you're looking for answers. Victor's grip on the phone tightened. Who are you? A soft chuckle. Someone who's been watching. Someone who knows that the king has fallen. Victor's jaw clenched. If you have something to say, say it. I suggest you take a closer look at your accounts. What little remains of them? The line went dead. Victor's pulse roared in his ears as he rushed to his laptop, his hands shaking as he typed in his login credentials. The screen loaded painfully slow, every second dragging like an eternity. When his account balance finally appeared, his breath caught in his throat. Zero. Not a single dollar remained. Not a single investment. Not a single asset. Everything had been drained. He staggered back, the chair scraping against the floor as he nearly lost his balance. His mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. How? How had this happened? And then it hit him. Elena. She hadn't just taken his company. She had taken everything. A bitter laugh escaped his lips, the sound hollow and humorless. He had spent years believing he was untouchable, that no one could bring him down. And now, in the span of a single night, he had been reduced to nothing. The penthouse suddenly felt suffocating. Victor Harrington had never known desperation. True, gut-wrenching, pride-shattering desperation. Until now. His suits, once symbols of power, now hung loosely on his frame. His shoes, polished to perfection in another life, splashed through the cold, unforgiving rain as he wandered the streets of Blackwood City, searching for her. Elena. His name was no longer spoken with admiration. Whispers of his downfall followed him everywhere. He had become nothing more than a cautionary tale. How the mighty could fall, how arrogance could be a man's undoing. But none of that mattered to him. He needed to find her. The storm raged above, matching the storm inside him. Rainwater dripped from his hair, seeping through his clothes, chilling him to the bone. He barely noticed. And then, Through the blurred glow of streetlights, he saw it. A small cafe. Familiar, warm, untouched by time. The place she once worked, the place he once mocked. The irony was bitter. His heart pounded as he stepped closer. His reflection ghosted against the window, a stark contrast to the scene inside. There she was. Elena sat at a corner table, her laughter rising above the hum of conversation. Her eyes shone with something Victor had never been able to give her: peace, joy, freedom. And across from her, Daniel Laurent. Victor's stomach twisted painfully. The man who had always been there, watching, waiting. The man who had seen what Victor had been too blind to notice. Victor swallowed hard and pushed open the door. The bell chimed, but no one looked up. No hushed whispers. No gasps of recognition. No one cared that Victor Harrington, once untouchable, now stood among them as a broken man. He stepped forward, feet heavy, breath shallow. Elena turned, sensing his presence. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world stopped. Elena, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, forcing the words out. Please. She didn't move, didn't blink. She simply studied him, taking in the man before her. The man who had once belittled her. The man who had spent years making her feel small. And yet, standing before her now, he was the one who looked so very small. Victor swallowed, forcing himself to keep going. I was wrong. The words tasted foreign, but he meant them. About everything. Elena exhaled softly, setting down her cup. Yes, Victor, she said, her voice steady. You were. And then, without another word, she stood. Victor's breath caught in his throat as she turned away, as she walked past him, as she stepped into the rain without looking back. He could only watch, because for the first time in his life, there was no second chance. Victor Harrington was a ghost of the man he used to be. He wandered through the streets of Blackwood City, haunted by the echoes of his past life. The weight of his mistakes sat heavy on his chest, suffocating him. No amount of whiskey, no amount of empty apologies could bring back what he had lost. His penthouse, his cars, his tailored suits, none of it mattered now. His wealth had been stripped away, his power reduced to nothing more than a faded memory. The same people who once fought for his attention now barely acknowledged his existence. Waiters who had once scurried to serve him now ignored him. Business partners who once sought his favor now laughed behind his back. The whispers were unbearable. Did you hear about Victor Harrington? A complete failure. He had it all, and he threw it away. Serves him right. Each word stung like a knife. Each glance a reminder of how far he had fallen. He wasn't the king of Blackwood City anymore. He was nothing. His downfall was everywhere. The news channels no longer spoke of him with admiration, but with pity. Online forums dragged his name through the mud. Even the socialites, the women he had once carelessly entertained, turned their backs on him. He tried to call them, desperate for a familiar voice, a shred of validation. Not a single one answered. He stumbled into an upscale bar one evening, hoping for a distraction, but the moment he sat down, a group of men at the next table erupted into laughter. It took him a second to realize they were laughing at him. Look who it is. Harrington himself, one of them sneered. Didn't think you'd be drinking with us mere mortals. What happened to your private lounges? Oh wait. The table burst into laughter. Victor gritted his teeth, gripping his glass tighter, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had built his empire on arrogance, and now that it was gone, so was the fear, the respect, the admiration. No one saw him as powerful anymore, just pathetic. He left the bar before finishing his drink. The city he once owned now felt foreign, its towering buildings a mockery of the power he no longer held. He walked aimlessly through the rain-soaked streets, his thoughts a mess of regret and resentment. And then, just as he was about to cross an intersection, he saw her. Elena, his breath caught in his throat. She stood outside a bookstore, flipping through the pages of a novel, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the streetlights. She looked so peaceful, so effortlessly beautiful, as if the world had only ever been kind to her. As if she had never known pain, never known him. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Then she laughed at something someone beside her had said. Victor's stomach twisted when he realized who it was. Daniel Laurent. Of course. Victor clenched his fists, jealousy and regret warring within him. It should have been him. It had been him. And he had destroyed it. He thought about walking up to her, about saying something, anything, but what was left to say? She had given him her answer. She had walked away, and he had been too blind to stop her. Instead, he turned around and walked in the opposite direction, disappearing into the night like the ghost of a man he had become. Elena Carter Harrington had never felt lighter. The chains of the past, the weight of silent endurance, the suffocating presence of a man who had once towered over her, all of it was gone. She was no longer a woman defined by someone else's name, no longer the quiet, obedient wife waiting for scraps of affection. She had stepped into her own power, and for the first time, it was hers alone. Her life had become something beautiful. Her days were filled with purpose. Her laughter no longer forced, her steps no longer hesitant. The world, once dimmed by the shadow of Victor Harrington, now stretched wide and bright before her. And she embraced it. Blackwood City had changed. Or perhaps she had. The streets felt different beneath her heels, no longer filled with whispers of mockery, but admiration. No longer did people see her as just Harrington's wife. They saw her for who she was. The woman who had walked away. The woman who had won. She spent her mornings at the office, leading meetings with the same board members who once answered to her husband. Only now, they answered to her. Her name carried weight, but not because of her wealth. It was because of her decisions, her strength, her resilience. The press no longer whispered about her past. They spoke of her success, her intelligence, her undeniable presence in the world of business. But the best part of her life wasn't the empire she now ruled. It was the peace she had found within herself. On an early Sunday morning, she stepped into her favorite cafe, the one that had once been her escape. The bell above the door chimed, and she inhaled the familiar scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries. This place had always been her safe haven, even when she was just a girl serving drinks behind the counter. And now, it was where she felt most at home. Daniel Laurent sat at their usual table, waiting for her. He looked up the moment she walked in, his expression soft, filled with something steady and sure. He had always been there, watching, waiting, never pushing. And now, as he smiled at her, she knew. This was real. This was love. Not the kind built on power, not the kind that came with conditions, but something effortless, something true. She sat down across from him, her fingers brushing against the warm ceramic of the coffee cup he had already ordered for her. He knew exactly how she liked it. No words were needed. "You ready?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle, knowing. Elena met his gaze and smiled. A real, unburdened, radiant smile. She nodded. She was finally free. If you found this story engaging, don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit the like button to show your support, drop a comment to share your thoughts, and most importantly, subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. And if you know someone who would enjoy this, share it with them, your friends, colleagues, and family.